bought by a small chieftain from the British, the Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh, and put together artificially. So actually the state of Jammu Kashmir is not more than 160 years old. So it's kind of been clunked together artificially, like most nation states are. But I suppose 160 years is a long time. There is a kind of affinity, but the question that the gentleman asked earlier about, is it a kind of, it's true, because it's not some sacrosanct, or it's not, centuries old, this relationship. So yeah, that's roughly what it's like. Yeah, please. Sorry, I take a question. Yes, please.
I'm wondering what kind of negotiations are going on between Kashmiri leaders and the central Indian government. You mentioned that,
yes,
the three alternatives.
Yes.
Joining Pakistan seems to be out of the question.
Yes.
Independence seems very unlikely,
yes,
not only because there's 600,000 troops on the ground, but because modern sovereign states just don't give up territory. In fact, some international relations scholars say to me there hasn't been a single case of a modern sovereign state voluntarily giving, yes, up a piece of its territory.
Right.
So if those two options are out, you think having some kind of negotiations with the Indian central government for them to be more civil in their dealings, yes, with Kashmir, for them to be spending money on schools in Kashmir instead of golf courses, or whatever, whatever the demands of the Kashmiri leaders might be. So are there identifiable figures that are representing Kashmir and trying to have some kind of negotiation with the central Indian government?
See, one of the problems is that the Indian state has spent 60 years in subverting the rise of a political class in Kashmir. Systematically kind of co-opting, sabotaging, whatever. So actually the political class that is visible is not terribly representative. Now that class, whether they call themselves separatists or they call themselves pro-India or whatever they call themselves, have periodically been engaged in talks. But increasingly they are walking on water. So the government of India can and does have these back channel talks, and there's always some talks going on and so on and so forth. But I don't know whether any of these political figures is in a position to sign something that the people will support. I don't think so. So actually there is a depth of resentment which people in the know about, which is why these negotiations are never meant to reach anywhere. There was a moment when, under American pressure, President Musharraf and Prime Minister Vajpayee were quite close to coming to some kind of agreement. But again, that was in the conception that it's an issue between India and Pakistan. So it was that, okay, we'll give them more autonomy, let's freeze the line of control the way it is, and so on and so forth, Nothing spectacular, but something, a step forward, for example. But Musharraf himself, he sort of lost his pants, and so, therefore nothing came of it. So as of now, for example, after last summer when Kashmir was on the boil for 6 months, the government appointed 3 interlocutors. They're 3 people with good CVs who have been swanning around Kashmir at great expense to the state for the last 4 or 5 months. The separatists have refused to meet them. So they are meeting like NGOs and college teachers and trade delegations and school teachers, and what's the point of that? That's not, if you want to know what people are thinking, you have to have a political negotiation. And if you've systematically destroyed politics, and this is the price you have to pay. You don't know who to talk to. The only people you could talk to are in the underground. And the underground is not going to show you their faces, because you will knock them out or buy them over or whatever. So it's a very curious situation in which the negotiation is taking place with people who have no connection with. not no connection, but a very tenuous connection, you know. So it's very, very, sorry, can we take the question then?
Yeah. Your movie is very fascinating, but I'm not sure if you have shown it, I'm not seeing fully, what actually is the Kashmir problem? What is the problem? Are there any security council resolutions about it? And is it a religious problem? Is it a territorial disputes? Because people are not aware of what this problem is.
Well, I think I tried to hint at it in the beginning. Essentially, I think that this may sound a bit, how should I say, this may sound a bit wishy-washy, but I think that Kashmiris have a very, very deep-seated sense of being colonized. And when I refer to the Sultans, Afghans, Mughals, Sikhs, it's not something that Kashmiris have ever forgotten. I have never encountered this sense of being colonized so palpable in people. You know. So I think that in the 1930s, when the people of Kashmir began a kind of anti-feudal movement against the Maharaja, that was the first time in 500 years that people had risen to take on power and authority. Unfortunately, came 1947 and partition, and so the whole thing got accelerated and then it took a different direction. So the 1947 ought to have been that moment of deliverance. You know, 1947 ought to have been the time when that long history of being colonized ought to have come to an end. But what took its place was what people perceive as another kind of colonization. So I myself am profoundly disinterested in Security Council resolutions and who signed the instrument of accession and so on, because I believe that no matter how much you are able to decode the legality of the position, at root is a very, very deep-seated sentiment for Azadi. And I know that in the modern day, sentiment is not a word that we are allowed to talk about in political spaces. But I don't believe that you can understand what's going on in Kashmir until you understand the sentiment. Your second question about is it a religious issue, I think that in 1989, 1990, when the militancy kind of exploded onto the scene, there's no doubt that it was connected with the larger shifts happening in our part of the world. The Soviet Union had collapsed, you know, the Taliban had come to the rise in Afghanistan, and there was a kind of, it was part of an Islamic upsurge in that part of the country, and what was happening in Kashmir was not unrelated. Having said that, I personally would say that I don't think it's principally, the idiom in which it is argued is an Islamic idiom, but then 98% of the people of Kashmir are Muslims. You know. So it would not surprise me that it's articulated in those terms. In the same way that after all, when Gandhi was arguing for India's freedom, he was talking about Ram Rajya, you know. And I don't think anybody held him, you know, sort of to ransom for saying that how can you use those kinds of, that kind of language. It's an issue, the religious dimension of it is, I won't say it's debated, but it's always being thought about. You know. So I think, for example, the position of minorities is constantly in the air. It's put sometimes, I've been at public meetings where people have put it to someone like Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, who's an important sort of Islamic leader. So I think that it's not a closed story. It's not as if everybody's agreed that this is an Islamic movement.